A broken spaceship sits in a suburban driveway, disguised as a house, and somewhere inside that house, a glass terrarium holds an entire civilization nobody knows exists. This is Solar Opposites, a journey through alien refugees, shrink rays, corrupt space cops, and a family that was supposed to save their species but kept getting distracted by television. From the moment Corvo and Terry crash landed in that quiet cul-de-sac, to the final revelation that their entire mission was a lie, engineered by the very institution meant to protect them, this timeline follows every failed escape attempt, every device that backfired, every tiny revolution fought inside a bedroom wall. So how did a team of 4 aliens assigned to terraform a planet end up married, enrolled in college, and fighting to protect the world they were designed to destroy? Somewhere far across the galaxy, there was a planet called Schlorp. It was, by all accounts, a perfect utopia advanced technology, regenerating limbs, a civilization that had figured out most of the problems other species spent millennia struggling with. The Schlorpians had it good. They had it really, really good. And then an asteroid appeared in the sky and everything ended. That destruction was not the first time it had happened to the Schlorpians, though nobody in this story knows that yet. For now, all that matters is the scramble. 100 evacuation ships launched from Schlorp's surface in the final hours. Each ship carried 2 adult Schlorpians, their replicants, which are essentially children grown from severed limbs and 1 pupa. The pupa was the key to everything. It was a small, slug-like organic supercomputer that contained every scrap of Schlorpian history and genetic data within its DNA. When the pupa eventually reached maturity, it would consume whatever planet it was on and terraform the entire world into a new copy of Schlorp. That was the plan: scatter across the universe, find uninhabited planets, protect the pupa until it was ready, and rebuild everything that had been lost. One of those 100 ships carried 4 Schlorpians. Corvo, the team leader, was a brilliant scientist with a rigid personality and a deep certainty that he was the smartest being in any room. He hated disorder, hated inefficiency, and would soon come to hate Earth with a white-hot passion that never fully went away. His evacuation partner was Terry, a laid-back pupa specialist who had cheated his way through most of his classes back on Schlorp, but still somehow ended up certified to care for the most important organism in the species' survival plan. Terry was the opposite of Corvo, in almost every way easygoing, curious, eager to try new things, and completely unbothered by the fact that civilization had just collapsed around him. Then there were the replicants. Yumulak was Corvo's replicant, grown from his own limb, and he inherited most of Corvo's worst qualities: the arrogance, the superiority complex, the impulse to control every situation. He was sharp, mean, and immediately decided that most things on Earth were beneath him. Jessie was Terry's replicant, and she carried Terry's gentler instincts into something even softer. Jessie wanted to fit in. She wanted friends. She wanted to understand the people around her, not just study them from a distance. Between these 4 aliens and the small yellow pupa they carried, the team had everything they needed to rebuild a planet. What they did not have was a working ship. Their vessel crash landed in a quiet American suburb. The impact damaged the ship badly enough that it could not fly, stranding them on a planet that was already full of people, billions of them in fact, none of whom had any idea that aliens had just moved into the neighborhood. The ship itself, controlled by an artificial intelligence named Aisha, became their house. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban home. From the inside, it was still an alien spacecraft full of advanced technology, bizarre devices, and a growing number of problems that Corvo was determined to fix. The mission was simple in theory: protect the pupa, fix the ship, get off Earth, find an uninhabited planet, and let the pupa do what it was designed to do. But from the very first day, it was clear that this team was not exactly built for success. Corvo wanted to leave immediately and treated every second on Earth as a personal insult. Terry saw the crash landing as the beginning of an interesting vacation. Jessie enrolled in the local high school and started trying to make human friends, and Yumulak, within hours of arriving, had already begun shrinking people who annoyed him and storing them inside the wall of his bedroom. That last detail might sound like a throwaway gag. A weird alien kid with a shrink ray and a bad attitude, picking off humans who looked at him wrong and dropping them into a glass terrarium mounted in his wall. But that terrarium, that wall would grow into something nobody expected. Not the family, not the people trapped inside it, and certainly not anyone watching. For now, though, it was just Yumulak being Yumulak. The first person he shrunk was a girl at school who had bullied him and Jessie. When the family realized they could not unshrink her without attracting attention, Yumulak built the wall as a storage solution. He and Jesse agreed to only shrink adults going forward, since missing kids would raise more alarms. It was casual, almost lazy in its cruelty, and it set the tone for how this family would interact with Earth, carelessly, destructively, and without much thought about what happened to the people caught in their wake. Meanwhile, Corvo threw himself into repairing the ship. Every episode of this early stretch features him working on some component, scavenging some part, or testing some piece of alien technology that was supposed to bring them one step closer to leaving. And every time, something went wrong. The repairs failed, the technology backfired, or the family's own dysfunction sabotaged the effort. Earth kept pulling them back, not because it wanted them, but because they could not stop tripping over their own mistakes long enough to actually go. The pupa sat in the middle of all of this, small and yellow, changing colors occasionally in ways that no one fully understood. Terry was supposed to be monitoring it, but Terry was more interested in watching television, trying Earth food, and buying lottery tickets. The pupa ate junk food, watched cartoons, and generally behaved more like a pet than a planet, destroying supercomputer. That gap between what the pupa was supposed to be and what the family treated it as would become one of the longest running tensions in the entire series. But early on, nobody was worried. The pupa was fine. The mission could wait. Earth was weird, but it was not going anywhere, and neither, as it turned out, were they. The first real test of this family was not a villain or a space threat. It was a neighborhood. The Solars had landed in a cul-de-sac full of ordinary humans, and their first challenge was simply not getting noticed. Corvo's approach to this problem was technological. Terry's approach was social. Neither worked particularly well, and together they created a pattern that would repeat across the entire first season: use alien tech to solve a human problem, watch the tech spiral out of control, barely survive the consequences, and learn absolutely nothing from it. In one of the earliest episodes, Corvo and Terry deployed nanobots to scan their neighbors, looking for weaknesses and emotional leverage that could make the humans like them. The idea was manipulation disguised as friendliness: figure out what people needed, give it to them, and earn their trust. Instead, the nanobots revealed how messy and complicated human relationships actually were, and the Solars ended up deeper in neighborhood drama than they ever intended. Terry found the whole thing fascinating. Corvo found it horrifying. Neither of them came away with any real human friends, but they did come away with a clearer picture of how strange and fragile the people around them were. At the same time, Jesse and Yumulak were navigating the equally alien landscape of high school. Jesse wanted desperately to be accepted. She tried to understand human social hierarchies, joined activities, and approached her classmates with genuine warmth. Yumulak treated school like a science experiment in which the test subjects annoyed him. When people bothered him, he shrunk them. When teachers gave him trouble, he considered shrinking them too. The principal, a man whose actual first name was also Principal, making his full title. Principal Cook was openly hostile toward the alien kids, and his prejudice only gave Yumulak more reasons to dismiss Earth's institutions entirely. This split between Jesse and Yumulak was one of the show's earliest and most important dynamics. Jesse leaned into empathy. She looked at humans and saw people worth understanding. Yumulak looked at humans and saw an inferior species that he could literally make smaller whenever he wanted. They were replicants of Terry and Corvo respectively, and they carried those same opposing instincts in miniature. Jesse was the heart of the family. Yumulak was the trigger finger. Back at the house, Corvo spent most of his energy on the ship. He ran diagnostics, rebuilt components, and tested systems with the single-minded focus of someone who believed that leaving Earth was the only acceptable outcome. Terry, meanwhile, had settled into Earth like a tourist who had accidentally booked a permanent stay. He wore human t-shirts. He ate human snacks. He watched human television with the kind of devotion that most people reserve for religious practice. Every episode featured Terry wearing a new shirt with a different dumb slogan on it, and every opening narration featured Corvo ranting about something he hated about Earth, while Terry cheerfully undermined him in the background. The house itself operated on 2 levels, and this is where the structure of the show started to reveal itself. Upstairs, you had the family drama, Corvo's frustration, Terry's enthusiasm, Jesse's social experiments, and whatever device or gadget was going to blow up that week. Downstairs, or more precisely, inside the wall of Yumulak's bedroom, you had something else entirely. The people Yumulak had shrunk were not just frozen in place. They were alive, aware, and slowly building a society. Jesse participated in the wall in a different way than Yumulak. She was less interested in the shrinking itself and more drawn to the caretaking side. She would feed the tiny people, dropping food into the terrarium like someone tending an ant farm. She saw them as small, helpless creatures that needed looking after. Yumulak saw them as a collection trophies of every human who had irritated him enough to deserve being miniaturized. Neither of them thought about what was actually happening inside that glass case. Neither of them considered that the people in the wall might be forming alliances, fighting for resources, and building something that looked a lot like a civilization. The family's alien technology was the engine driving most early episodes. Corvo would invent or repurpose a device, a matter transfer array, an unstable gray hole, a quantum ring, and the device would solve a problem for about 5 minutes before creating a worse one. Terry would contribute by either misusing the tech or encouraging Corvo to use it in ways it was never intended. The kids would sometimes get their own devices, or sometimes get caught in the fallout of whatever their parents had done. Each episode was essentially a contained disaster, with the tech serving as both the setup and the punchline. But even in these early episodic stories, something was being established underneath the comedy. Every failed escape attempt made the family more entangled with Earth. Every time Corvo tried to fix the ship and it did not work, the suburban house became a little more like a real home. Terry was already calling it home. Jesse was already making friends. Even Umulak, for all his contempt, was building something in the wall that he cared about even if he would never admit it. The only person still fully committed to leaving was Corvo, and even his commitment was starting to look less like determination and more like denial. AIS Aisha, the ship's AI, watched all of this with a kind of exasperated patience. She was sassy, blunt, and had very little interest in pretending the family was doing a good job. She tracked the pupa's development, monitored the ship's systems, and occasionally reminded everyone that their mission was, technically, the most important thing any of them would ever do. Nobody listened. The pupa sat in its corner, blinked yellow when it lost its Wi-Fi signal, and kept slowly changing colors in ways that nobody bothered to fully investigate. The foundation was set. A broken ship, a strange neighborhood, 2 adults who could not agree on anything, 2 kids pulling in opposite directions, a pupa nobody was properly watching, and behind one bedroom wall, a growing population of tiny humans who had no idea how long they would be trapped there. The family was not falling apart, they were settling in, whether they wanted to or not. The early Earth episodes moved fast. Each one dropped a new piece of alien technology into the family's hands and let the chaos unspool from there. Corvo became a magician using the quantum ring, which gave him real teleportation powers he passed off as stage tricks. Jesse overheard other magicians plotting to kill him for upstaging them, and the whole thing spiraled into a weirdly violent backstage conspiracy before resolving in the way most early episodes did, messily, with collateral damage, and with the family no closer to leaving Earth than before. In another episode, Corvo's stress levels hit a breaking point thanks to Terry's constant irritating behavior, and his body produced something called a red goobler, a small, angry, crimson creature whose only programmed purpose was to kill Corvo. The goobler was a manifestation of everything Corvo was bottling up, given teeth and a bad attitude. The family had to deal with this murderous little goblin while also figuring out that Jesse and Umulak were going through physical changes they mistakenly believed were puberty. On Schlorp, their bodies would have handled it differently. On Earth, surrounded by human concepts of growing up, they panicked. The goobler would eventually become engaged to a human woman, develop a love for The Hangover and Joe Rogan, and open his own bar, but that was all later. For now, he was just a small red problem that Corvo had literally sweated into existence. These Gadget of the Week episodes were not just filler though. Each one revealed something about how the family interacted with Earth, and each one tightened the knots tying them to suburban life. When Terry tried to change Corvo's demanding personality using alien tech, the results caused citywide chaos and showed how dependent the family dynamic was on Corvo being exactly who he was: insufferable, controlling, but ultimately the only one keeping the mission even remotely on track. When Corvo built a robot wife named Patricia, after misunderstanding a human argument about man caves, the robot turned controlling and possessive, and the whole mess became a dark comedy about what happens when you build a relationship out of misunderstood cultural assumptions. Terry was hurt by the robot wife's existence. Corvo did not understand why. The device was eventually destroyed, but the tension it exposed between them did not go away. Jesse's arc in these early episodes kept pulling her toward human empathy in ways that the rest of the family found baffling. When she tried to show Umulak the good in humans, he resisted every step of the way. When she pursued a school assignment about feminism, she accidentally went down the wrong path and had to ask Umulak for help correcting course, which was humiliating for her and deeply amusing for him. Jesse wanted to believe that humans were worth understanding. She was constantly being shown evidence that they were messy, selfish, and cruel. But unlike Umulak, she did not take that as permission to dominate them. She took it as a challenge to connect anyway. Umulak, meanwhile, kept escalating. The shrink ray was not just a tool, it was becoming a habit. Every adult who annoyed him, every neighbor who looked at the family wrong, every server who got his food order slightly off, they all ended up miniaturized and tossed into the wall. He did not think about what happened to them afterward. To him, the wall was a closet where he put things he did not want to deal with. The fact that those things were human beings with lives, relationships, and survival instincts did not register as a problem. The family abused their technology constantly. They broke local reality on a regular basis. Nanobots, shrink rays, matter transfer devices, time manipulation gadgets. The Solars treated their advanced alien toolkit the way a bored teenager treats a chemistry set. Most of it blew up. Most of it caused harm. And most of it taught them nothing because the comedy of the show depended on the family never quite learning from their mistakes. Every lesson circled back to the same realization: Earth was gross, humans were strange, but the Solars were not actually any better. What made these episodes work was not the plots themselves, but the small moments between the action. Corvo and Terry arguing in the kitchen about something meaningless. Jesse sitting alone at lunch, watching human kids interact and trying to figure out the rules. Yumulak firing the shrink ray at someone with an expression that looked less like anger and more like boredom. The pupa eating something it should not be eating while Aisha sighed in the background. The show was building a family portrait one disaster at a time, and even the silliest episodes added a brushstroke. By the midpoint of the first season, the pattern was clear. The Solars were not going to fix the ship anytime soon. They were not going to stop using alien tech irresponsibly. They were not going to suddenly understand humans or become good neighbors. But they were, slowly and without realizing it, becoming a family that functioned not well, not gracefully, but in the way that families actually function. Through arguments, shared disasters, reluctant compromises, and the quiet understanding that none of them had anywhere else to go. And behind the bedroom wall, completely unnoticed by the family that created it, something much darker was taking shape. Tim Weekly was just a guy. He was eating at a burger joint, wearing a red shirt, minding his own business when a beam of light hit him and the world suddenly got very, very big. Yumulak had shrunk him for no better reason than the color of his clothing. One moment, Tim was a normal, slightly awkward human being with a normal, slightly unremarkable life. The next, he was falling into a glass terrarium filled with other shrunken people who had already been there long enough to build rules, factions, and a hierarchy that operated on pure desperation. The wall, when Tim arrived, was not a blank slate. It was already a society, a brutal, stratified one, controlled by a man who called himself the Duke. The Duke's real name was Ringo, but nobody used it. He ruled the wall with absolute authority, hoarding the supplies that Jesse dropped into the terrarium during feedings and distributing them only to those who served him. The upper levels of the wall were where the Duke's loyalists lived, eating well and staying relatively comfortable. The lower levels were an underclass, scavenging for scraps and living in constant fear. The whole setup was like a prison run by its most charismatic inmate, and the Duke maintained his position through a combination of intimidation, resource control, and the occasional public execution. Tim was attacked almost immediately upon arrival. A group of scavengers jumped him, and he was saved by a janitor who taught him the basics of wall survival: stay low, do not challenge the Duke, and find a way to be useful. Tim absorbed the lessons, but could not quite bring himself to accept the situation. He was a decent person stuck in an indecent place, and that tension would define everything he did for the rest of his time in the wall. Not long after Tim, another person was dropped in. Cherie had been a waitress at a Benihana restaurant. Yumulak had ordered food. She had served him shrimp when he specifically said no shrimp, and for that crime, she was now 3 inches tall and falling into a glass box run by a despot. Tim found her, saved her from the same scavengers who had jumped him, and the two of them quickly formed a bond. When Tim quoted a movie line and Cherie corrected him, telling him it was from Terminator, not Predator, it was the kind of small, specific detail that made their connection feel real. They were two random people who had been pulled out of their lives by the same careless alien teenager, and they decided to look after each other. Together with a man named Pedro and his diabetic father Enrique, Tim and Cherie went on a dangerous mission to the upper levels to get insulin from the Duke. The Duke controlled the medicine supply along with everything else, and approaching him meant accepting his authority. The Duke gave Enrique the insulin, but the favor came with a cost. When Pedro was later blamed for starting a riot, the Duke had him executed, decapitated in front of the other wall residents as a message. Pedro's death changed everything for Tim and Cherie. What had been quiet survival became active resistance. The resistance started small. Tim, Cherie, and Enrique tried to cut off the Duke's food supply, hoping to weaken his grip. But Enrique, desperate and compromised by the insulin his father needed, betrayed them. He became one of the Duke's enforcers, the Walderman, and turned Tim and Cherie over. Cherie was thrown into the Boohoo Hole, a pit in the lower levels that was assumed to be a death sentence. She vanished. Tim was captured and thrown into a cell, and for a while it looked like the resistance was over before it had truly begun. But the thing about the wall was that it never stayed quiet for long. While Tim rotted in his cell, his words, the things he had said about fighting back, about refusing to accept the Duke's rule, had spread. They had been written on walls, repeated in whispers, turned into something that looked a lot like a manifesto. People Tim had never met were calling themselves members of his resistance. What started as two people trying to get insulin had become a movement, and when Tim was eventually broken out of prison, he found that the wall had been waiting for him to lead it. The person who broke Tim out was Cherie. She had survived the Boohoo Hole, battered, broken, but alive. They reunited, compared battle scars, and for the first time, the resistance felt like it had a real chance. They went to the Bowenian Church, a religious group inside the wall that worshipped Jesse as a god, and they listened to the Duke give one of his public speeches. One of the Duke's enforcers tried to kill them. He failed, and the resistance surged forward. This was the first time the show revealed what the wall truly was. Not a gag, not a side joke about Umulac's cruelty. It was a full civilization, with politics, religion, class warfare, and genuine stakes. People died in the wall. People fell in love in the wall. People built belief systems and power structures and entire lives inside a glass box that a teenage alien used as a junk drawer. The family upstairs had no idea. They were busy stealing bears from the zoo and arguing about dinner. The wall was operating on a completely different frequency, darker, more dramatic, and more emotionally complex than anything happening in the main storyline. Tim and Cherie led the resistance into battle against the Duke, and the Duke responded the way tyrants always do, with disproportionate violence. He flooded the lower levels of the wall, killing hundreds of shrunken people in a wave of water that, in the real world, would have been no more than a spilled drink. The scale of it was the whole point. Tiny people drowning in tiny amounts of liquid, dying in a catastrophe that would not even register as a mess to the giants above them. The resistance survived the flood and stormed the Duke's palace. But when Tim and Cherie reached the top, they found that the Duke had already escaped through a hole in the back of the wall that led to the outside. A way out. Freedom. The thing every person in the wall had been fighting for was right there. A crack in the glass leading to the enormous, terrifying world beyond. And that was when Tim made his choice. Back in the main house, while the wall was tearing itself apart, Corvo and Terry kept failing at the one thing Corvo cared about most, leaving Earth. Every episode in this stretch featured some new attempt to repair the ship, find a missing component, or build a device that would let them escape the planet. Every attempt failed. The ship was too damaged, the parts were too rare, or the family's own stupidity sabotaged the effort before it could succeed. Corvo treated each failure as a temporary setback. Terry treated each failure as evidence that maybe they should just stay. This tension, Corvo wanting to leave and Terry wanting to stay, was the emotional backbone of the entire first season. It played out in small moments more often than big ones. Corvo would spend all day rebuilding a manifold while Terry sat on the couch watching television. Corvo would test a new device, and Terry would accidentally break it by using it to make nachos. Every argument between them was really the same argument dressed up in different alien tech. Should they fight to get back what they lost, or should they accept what they had? Terry had already made his choice, even if he had not said it out loud. He loved Earth. He loved the television, the junk food, the dog parks, the randomness of human culture. He wore a different goofy t-shirt every day, like a man who had fully committed to being a tourist in his own life. Corvo saw this as laziness, as a betrayal of the mission. What he did not see, what he could not see, yet, was that Terry's openness to Earth was not weakness. It was the thing that would eventually save all of them from becoming rigid, bitter exiles clinging to a dead planet's memory. Jessie, meanwhile, was living her own version of the struggle at school. She wanted to belong. She tried out for activities, sat with human kids at lunch, and attempted to navigate the social dynamics of high school, the way an anthropologist might study a newly contacted tribe with fascination, care, and frequent confusion. The school itself was hostile territory. Principal Cook and Ms. Frankie, a teacher conducting a secret affair with the principal, were both openly prejudiced against the alien students. Jessie faced this hostility with persistence rather than anger, absorbing insults and misunderstandings and showing up the next day ready to try again. Umulac took the opposite approach. School was beneath him. The teachers were idiots. The students were targets. His shrink ray was always within reach, and his patience for human nonsense was measured in seconds. When he and Jesse were sent to school together, they embodied the family's central conflict in miniature: engagement versus contempt, curiosity versus control. Jesse made friends slowly and carefully. Yamulak made enemies quickly and casually. His god complex was not just a personality quirk, it was the engine driving the wall. Every person he shrunk and dropped into the terrarium reinforced his sense of power. He was, to the people inside the wall, a literal giant, an unknowable force that could destroy their world by accident. The Bohemian church inside the wall did not worship Yamulak, but they did worship Jesse, the one who fed them, the gentler hand that occasionally reached into their world. To the wall's inhabitants, Jesse was a kind god and Yamulak was an indifferent one, and neither of the replicants had any idea they had been cast in those roles. Even the lighter episodes of this stretch mattered for the long game. When Corvo entered a local rib festival and won the top prize, it was played as a gag, an alien dominating a suburban cookout, but it was also Corvo accidentally engaging with human culture in a way he would never have chosen deliberately. When Terry's obsession with dinner parties dragged the family into social situations with their neighbors, the mess that followed was silly, but it also forced the Solars to interact with humans as peers rather than subjects. Every time the family stumbled into Earth culture, they got a little more tangled in it. The kids' school storylines were particularly good at this slow entanglement. Jesse's attempts at feminism went sideways. Yamulak's attempts at rule following were undermined by his complete inability to respect authority. They found themselves empty in the school building during one episode because nobody else had shown up, and the experience of being alone in a human institution with all its rules and expectations highlighted how alien they truly were. But even being alien in a human school was a form of participation. By attending, by trying, by failing, Jesse and Yamulak were becoming part of Earth's social fabric, whether they wanted to be or not. Corvo resisted this. He clung to the mission, to the ship, to the idea that Earth was a prison they would escape. He produced another Goobler from sheer stress and had to deal with a murderous red creature that wanted to eat him, which was basically a physical metaphor for what his own anxiety was already doing. Terry tried to calm him down. Jesse tried to show him the bright side. Yamulak did not care either way, and the pupa sat on the floor, slowly shifting from yellow to lavender, a color change that nobody investigated and nobody understood. The family was stuck. Not because the ship could not be fixed, though it could not, but because each member was developing a relationship with Earth that went beyond tolerance. Corvo would never admit it. Terry had already accepted it. Jesse was building it. And Yamulak was creating an entire world inside the wall that, even if he did not think of it that way, was the most Earth thing any of them had done. While the Solars bumbled through suburban life upstairs, the wall was escalating into something that resembled a full political drama. The resistance that Tim and Cherie had built was not a clean, heroic movement. It was messy, factional, and constantly undermined by the same survival pressures that had kept the Duke in power. People joined because they were hungry, not because they believed in freedom. People betrayed the cause because the Duke offered insulin or food or protection. The moral clarity of fight the tyrant kept colliding with the practical reality that the tyrant controlled everything worth having. Tim had emerged as the face of the resistance almost by accident. He was not a natural leader. He was a normal guy in a red shirt who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the wall needed a symbol, and Tim fit the role. He was approachable, relatable, and his story, an ordinary person thrown into an extraordinary nightmare, resonated with the other captives. Cherie was the one with real tactical instincts. She understood the Duke's supply lines, knew which enforcers could be turned, and had the emotional intelligence to read situations that Tim blundered through on instinct and good intentions. The scavenging runs that fueled the resistance were dangerous operations. Teams of tiny people would venture into the unexplored regions of the terrarium, looking for food scraps, useful materials, anything that could give the resistance an edge. These runs always carried the risk of discovery by the Duke's Waldermen, who patrolled the upper levels and enforced the Duke's will with the kind of casual brutality that comes from knowing your boss controls whether you eat today. Enrique, who had betrayed Tim and Cherie to save his father's life, was now one of those enforcers, and his presence was a constant reminder that the line between resistance fighter and collaborator was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The class structure of the wall was not subtle. Upper levels had light, food, relative safety. Lower levels had darkness, scarcity, and the constant threat of violence. The Duke maintained this hierarchy deliberately. Keeping the lower levels desperate meant keeping them dependent on whatever scraps of generosity he chose to offer. When people from the lower levels tried to organize or push back, the Duke made examples of them. Pedro's execution was not an isolated incident, it was policy. Tim's rise as a resistance organizer followed a pattern that felt almost inevitable in hindsight. He started by helping people get basic supplies. He moved to coordinating scavenging runs. He began holding secret meetings in the lower levels, talking about what the wall could be if the Duke was removed. Each step was logical, each step was necessary, and each step pulled him further from the ordinary person he had been. The wall was reshaping Tim in real time, turning a mild-mannered guy in a red shirt into someone who could rally desperate people toward a dangerous goal. Cherie was changing too, but in different ways. She was harder than Tim, more willing to make difficult calls, more aware of the costs of revolution. When Tim wavered, Cherie pushed. When Tim got sentimental about the people they might lose, Cherie reminded him that the people they had already lost were the reason they were fighting. She was the backbone of the resistance in the ways that did not get speeches made about them. The planning, the organizing, the ugly compromises that kept the movement alive. The Bowenian Church added another layer to the wall's politics. This religious group had formed around the worship of Jesse, the alien who fed them from above. To the Bowenians, Jesse was a deity, a giant hand that brought sustenance, a presence that watched over them. The church's leader, Sister Sasha, used this faith to build her own power base within the wall, and the resistance had to navigate the church's influence carefully. The Bowenians were not allies exactly, but they were not enemies either. They were a wild card, a third faction with their own agenda, and their existence proved that the wall had grown complex enough to sustain multiple power structures competing for the loyalty of the same trapped population. Meanwhile, in the lower levels, a man named Steven, a former CEO who had been shrunk and dropped into the wall, had found a different kind of life entirely. Steven had a pet mouse named Molly, one of the actual mice that occasionally got into the terrarium, and he had built a small, quiet existence in the forgotten corners of the wall. He farmed mouse milk, kept to himself, and avoided the politics that consumed everyone above him. Steven was what happened when you gave up on the power struggle entirely and just tried to survive in the margins. His story was small and strange and deeply human, and it ran parallel to the larger conflict without ever quite intersecting with it. The Duke knew the resistance was growing. He responded with increased patrols, harsher punishments, and the kind of paranoid crackdown that always makes revolutionaries look more justified. Tim and Cherie planned, recruited, and waited for their moment. The wall was a pressure cooker, and every episode that touched on it added more heat. Food was running low. Tensions were rising. New people kept getting dropped in by Umuolak, confused and terrified, immediately swept into a conflict they did not understand. And upstairs, completely oblivious, the solar opposites argued about what to watch on television. The gap between the two storylines was the entire point. The family's casual cruelty created a world of genuine suffering, and they had no idea it existed. Umuolak fed the wall the way someone might feed fish in a tank mechanically, without thought, without any recognition that the creatures inside had built something that mattered. The first wall war was coming. Tim knew it. Cherie knew it. The Duke knew it too, which was why he started preparing his escape route, a hole in the back of the wall that led to the outside world, a secret he had kept since the beginning, a way out that he had never shared with anyone. On the main family side, Corvo and Terry used a time travel device called the Retrace Your Step Alicer to go back to Schlorp before its destruction. The goal was to retrieve a wallet that contained crucial information about the pupa's development. It was the first time the audience got a proper look at what Schlorpian civilization actually looked like, advanced, colorful, and utterly alien in ways that the suburban setting had obscured. More importantly, it was the first time we saw what Corvo and Terry were like before they became partners. On Schlorp, they did not know each other. They were assigned to the same evacuation ship, paired by bureaucratic necessity rather than choice. The relationship that had become the emotional center of the show started as paperwork. The time travel went wrong, because time travel in this show always goes wrong. Corvo and Terry's actions created a butterfly effect that altered history, and they ended up bringing an annoying Schlorpian named Vanbo back with them to Earth. Vanbo was the kind of persistent, clueless tag-along that made Corvo want to produce a new Googler every 5 minutes, and his presence disrupted the already fragile family dynamic. But the real importance of the episode was not the plot, it was the glimpse of the lost world. Schlorp was beautiful, functional, and gone. Seeing it alive made its destruction feel real in a way that the opening narration never quite managed. These aliens were not just weird immigrants, they were refugees grieving a home that they would never see again. Meanwhile, in a separate storyline within the same episode, Umuolak used a simulation device to learn how to be nicer to Jesse. The fact that he needed a machine to practice basic kindness toward his own sister said everything about where their relationship stood at this point. But the fact that he chose to use it, that he recognized the problem and took a step toward fixing it, even if that step was characteristically lazy and technological, suggested that even Yumulak was capable of growth. Slowly, reluctantly, with alien tech as a crutch. The pupa, at the end of this first season, shifted from yellow to lavender. Nobody in the family commented on it. Nobody ran a diagnostic or asked Aisha what it meant. The color change was a quiet signal that the pupa's development was progressing, that the organic supercomputer designed to devour a planet was slowly moving toward its purpose. But the Solars were too busy dealing with their own problems to notice, and the pupa's evolution continued in the background, unmonitored and uncontrolled. The season ended with the family still stranded, still dysfunctional, still no closer to leaving Earth. But something had shifted underneath the surface. Corvo was slightly less rigid. Terry was slightly more committed to staying. Jesse had made real connections at school, even if they were fragile. Yumulak had taken the smallest possible step toward being less of a tyrant. The mission had not moved an inch, but the family had moved incrementally, almost invisibly, toward becoming something more than a team of refugees stuck in the wrong place. In the Wall, the first season ended with the aftermath of Tim's choice. After the Duke fled through the hole and Cherie tried to tell everyone about the escape route, Tim stabbed her with his toothpick cane and threw her out of the hole. He covered up the exit, announced that the Duke was dead, lied about Cherie killing him, and declared himself the new leader of the Wall. He created Cherie Day, a holiday celebrating her fake sacrifice, and he justified his betrayal with a single, practical argument: if people went outside, they would be eaten by an owl. Tim was not entirely wrong about the danger. The outside world, at full human scale, was a terrifying place for someone 3 inches tall. Owls, possums, weather, insects, everything was a potential death sentence. But Tim's decision was not really about safety, it was about power. Inside the Wall, Tim was a hero, a leader, the man who overthrew the Duke. Outside the Wall, he was nobody. He was just a guy in a red shirt. The Wall gave Tim an identity, a purpose, and an audience, and he chose those things over the truth. Cherie, stabbed and thrown into the dark, survived. That would matter enormously later. But for now, the first season closed with Tim standing where the Duke had stood, wearing power like a new set of clothes, and the people of the Wall celebrating a lie they did not know was a lie. The family upstairs ate dinner and watched television. The Wall downstairs mourned a hero who was not dead and followed a leader who was not what he seemed. The pupa changed color in the corner, and the ship stayed broken. The solar opposites did not understand holidays. They did not understand why humans attached so much emotional weight to specific dates, or why certain foods mattered more in December than in June, or why people spent money they did not have on gifts for people they saw every day. But they tried. In their own baffled, destructive way, they tried. The holiday special, the first one the show produced, dropped the Solars into the middle of Earth's end-of-year traditions and watched them flail. Corvo approached the holidays like a research project, trying to decode the logic behind rituals that had no logic. Terry dove in headfirst, decorating the house, attempting to cook traditional meals, and generally treating the season as another opportunity to enjoy the weird planet he had been stranded on. Jesse found something genuinely warm in the idea of giving gifts and spending time with people you cared about. Yumulak found the whole thing stupid, but participated anyway, because the family was doing it and he did not want to be left out, a motivation he would never, ever have admitted to. What made this stretch important was not the comedy of aliens misunderstanding Christmas. It was the fact that they were participating at all. Every human ritual the Solars attempted was another thread tying them to Earth. They did not go caroling because they understood the tradition. They went caroling because their neighbors were doing it, and Terry said it looked fun. They did not exchange gifts because they valued the sentiment. They exchanged gifts because Jessie insisted, and nobody wanted to argue with her. The meaning was borrowed, secondhand, slightly wrong in every detail, but the act of participation was real, and it was changing them. Earth was starting to feel less temporary. This was the shift that the holiday episodes captured better than any of the action-heavy plots. The house was no longer just a disguised spaceship. It was a place where the family ate meals, had arguments, and built routines. Corvo still talked about leaving, but he talked about it less. Terry had stopped pretending that his enthusiasm for Earth was casual. He was fully invested, emotionally and socially, in their suburban life. Jesse had friends, a school identity, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with Schlorp. Even Yumulak, for all his contempt, had created something in the Wall that he tended to with regularity, even if he thought of it as a hobby rather than a responsibility. The pupa, through all of this, remained an unresolved question mark. Terry was supposed to be the pupa specialist, the member of the team whose job was to monitor, nurture, and guide the pupa through its developmental stages. Instead, Terry fed it junk food, let it watch television, and generally treated it like a family pet that was not quite housebroken. The pupa ate things it should not eat, wandered places it should not go, and occasionally displayed flashes of intelligence that nobody followed up on. Its color kept shifting. Its behavior kept getting stranger. And the family kept ignoring it because the pupa's eventual purpose, consuming the entire planet, was so enormous and so distant that it did not feel real. Aisha tried to keep them on track. She ran diagnostics, flagged concerns, and occasionally delivered information about the pupa's status with the weary tone of someone who had given up on being listened to. The ship's AI was the only member of the household who seemed to remember that they had a mission, and even she spent most of her energy managing the family's day-to-day chaos rather than pushing the larger agenda. The mission was supposed to be everything. It was supposed to be the reason they existed. But Earth kept offering distractions, and the family kept taking them. Down in the wall, the situation had grown too large and too complex to remain a background detail. Tim's leadership had established a new order, cleaner than the Duke's regime, more organized, and superficially more just. But the rot was already setting in. Tim's power depended on a lie, and maintaining that lie required more lies, more control, more compromises that eroded the principles the resistance had been built on. Cherie Day celebrations grew more elaborate. Tim's enforcers grew more visible. The hole in the back of the wall stayed covered, and the truth stayed buried, and the people of the wall continued to believe that their hero had died saving them. Cherie was out there somewhere, alive and wounded, carrying a secret that would eventually tear everything apart. But the wall did not know that yet. And Tim, sitting in the Duke's old seat, was learning the oldest lesson in the book: it is easier to take power than to deserve it. The first era of the Solar Opposites timeline ended here, not with a bang, but with a slow settling. The family was deeper in Earth than they had ever planned to be. The wall was deeper in its own history than anyone upstairs could imagine. The pupa was changing in ways nobody was watching. And the wider universe, the 99 other ships, the vast space beyond the suburb, waited in silence, not yet ready to complicate things further. The lights in the suburban house dimmed for the night. Somewhere inside the wall, a tiny civilization argued about rations. And in the backyard, crickets sang to a sky that none of the people trapped in the glass could see. The second season opened with something the family had been waiting for since the crash landing. The ship was fixed. Corvo had finally repaired enough systems for the vessel to fly, and for a brief, shining moment, it looked like the Solar Opposites were actually going to leave Earth. They packed up, they powered the ship, they launched into the sky. The ground shrank beneath them, the suburb became a grid, and Corvo allowed himself to believe that the nightmare of living among humans was finally over. It did not last. Something went hilariously wrong, because something always went hilariously wrong, and the ship came right back down to the same neighborhood, the same cul-de-sac, the same spot where it had been sitting for the entire first season. The attempted departure and immediate return set the tone for everything that followed. The family was more settled on Earth than ever, not because they had chosen to stay, but because the universe kept refusing to let them leave. Corvo took this as a personal insult. Terry barely pretended to be disappointed. What changed in the second season was not the family's situation, but their attitude toward it. The gadgets got bigger, the disasters got dumber, but the characters were no longer stumbling through Earth like tourists who had lost their luggage. They had routines now. Corvo had projects, Terry had hobbies, Jesse had a social circle, Umulak had the wall. They were still aliens, still fundamentally different from the people around them, but they had figured out where the grocery store was and how the school system worked and what channel played the shows Terry liked. The strangeness of Earth had faded into the background noise of daily life, and what remained was a family trying to function in a place that was not quite wrong for them but was never quite right either. Jesse and Umulak, in particular, started operating less like background characters and more like full agents in the timeline. In the first season, the replicants had mostly reacted to whatever Corvo and Terry set in motion. Now, they were driving plots on their own. Jesse's empathy had evolved from a general desire to fit in to a specific set of relationships and commitments that gave her a stake in Earth's social world. She was not just trying to make friends anymore. She was navigating existing friendships, dealing with social complications, and experiencing the kind of emotional messiness that comes from actually caring about the people around you. Umulak's trajectory was darker but equally autonomous. His god complex had graduated from impulsive shrinking to something more deliberate. He was not just reacting to people who annoyed him, he was curating his collection, making choices about who went into the wall and why, treating his power over tiny humans as a form of self-expression rather than simple irritation. The wall had grown large enough that it required maintenance, and Yamulak's relationship with it had shifted from careless cruelty to something closer to proprietary ownership. He still did not think of the people inside as people, exactly, but he thought of the wall itself as his, a project, a kingdom, a place that existed because he had built it. Terry's dinner party obsession kicked off one of the earliest episodes of the season and immediately demonstrated how deeply he had committed to Earth's social customs. The idea of hosting a dinner party, an event built entirely on human concepts of hospitality, social performance, and the careful management of other people's impressions, was so perfectly Terry that it almost felt inevitable. He threw himself into the planning with the kind of manic energy that Corvo usually reserved for ship repairs, and the result was, predictably, a disaster that dragged the whole family into social chaos. The meso trouble that followed was funny, but it was also proof that Terry was no longer visiting Earth. He was participating in it, investing in its rituals, caring about the outcomes of purely human interactions. Corvo, by contrast, was still clinging to the mission with both hands. The failed launch at the top of the season had damaged his confidence, but not his determination. He continued to tinker with the ship, continued to develop new devices, continued to approach Earth with the suspicious hostility of someone who expected to be leaving any day now. But the cracks were showing. Corvo's rants about hating Earth were becoming more routine than passionate, like complaints about weather rather than genuine battle cries. He was still the most committed to leaving, but even his commitment had started to feel like habit rather than conviction. The pupa had shifted to a new color by the start of the season, Pacific Blue, which Aisha noted signified that the solar opposites would die at midnight. This was delivered with the same casual tone that Aisha used for everything, and the family responded with the same casual indifference they applied to all pupa-related warnings. The idea that their planet-destroying infant supercomputer was signaling their impending death was treated as a mildly interesting fact, rather than an existential crisis. They had bigger things to worry about, like dinner parties and school and the ship that still would not fly properly. The dynamic between the adults had grown more complex. Corvo and Terry's relationship in the first season had been defined primarily by opposition. Corvo wanted to leave, Terry wanted to stay, and they argued about it constantly. In the second season, the opposition was still there, but it had softened into something more layered. They were not just arguing anymore, they were negotiating. When Corvo and Terry manipulated each other with time travel in one episode, each one trying to get the other to see things their way, the competition felt less like a genuine conflict and more like a long married couple playing the same game they had been playing for years, each knowing the other's moves before they made them. Yamulak grew a fat hog in the same episode, which was exactly the kind of random subplot that made this show feel lived in rather than plotted. Summer camp, rib festivals, shot glass mysteries. The second season's episodic adventures had a looser, more comfortable energy than the first season's frantic scrambling. The family had stopped trying to figure out Earth and started just living on it. They went to camp. They entered cooking competitions. They got into arguments that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with the small, stupid irritations of sharing a house with people whose habits drive you insane. The alien technology was still there, still causing problems, still the mechanism by which most plots got set in motion. But the tech felt less like a survival tool and more like a toy box, something the family reached into when they were bored, frustrated, or looking for an edge in whatever petty domestic conflict was occupying their attention that week. The Red Goobler came back. This time, he was jacked, physically transformed from the small red creature of the first season into something much more imposing. The Goobler's return was both a callback and an escalation, a reminder that the consequences of the family's actions did not just disappear. They grew. They changed. They came back bigger and angrier. The Goobler's continued existence as a sentient being with his own life and his own grudges was a running joke, but it was also a quiet commentary on how the Solars left wreckage everywhere they went and never quite cleaned it up. By the middle of the second season, the family was deeper into Earth life than they had ever been, and the show was settling into its groove. The main storyline was episodic and fun. The Wall storyline was serialized and intense. And between them, the two halves of the show created a contrast that made each one sharper. Every time you laughed at Corvo entering a rib festival, you remembered that shrunken people were fighting for survival in the next room. Every time the Wall got dark, you came back to the family's goofy suburban adventures and felt the relief of returning to something lighter. The show needed both halves to work, and by the second season, it knew exactly how to balance them. The middle stretch of the second season was the show at its most comfortable with the Monster of the Week format, and it used that comfort to reinforce the central pattern of the solar opposites Earth experience. Every shortcut the family takes makes their life stickier. Every device they abuse ties them more tightly to the planet they are trying to leave. And every attempt to cheat their way through a problem creates 2 new problems that require 2 more cheats to solve. Corvo and Terry's time travel manipulation was a perfect example. They each wanted to change the other's mind about Earth. Corvo wanted Terry to take the mission seriously. Terry wanted Corvo to relax and enjoy the planet, and they used an alien device called the Lake House to send messages to each other across different time periods. The idea was clever. The execution was petty. They spent the entire episode outmaneuvering each other, sending increasingly manipulative messages designed to alter the other's decisions, and the whole thing devolved into a temporal prank war that neither of them won. The takeaway was not that time travel was dangerous, which the show had already established. The takeaway was that Corvo and Terry's disagreement about Earth could not be resolved by technology, because it was not a technical problem, it was an emotional one. They wanted different things, and no device in the galaxy was going to change that. The summer camp episode dropped the whole family into another Earth institution and watched them fail at it in character-specific ways. Corvo approached camp like a military exercise. Terry approached it like a vacation. Jesse tried to make friends with the human campers. Yumulak treated the whole thing as beneath him. The episode was light and fun, a classic fish-out-of-water setup, but it served the larger purpose of showing how the family engaged with each new piece of Earth culture. They never adapted smoothly. They always brought their alien instincts and alien technology into situations that did not require either, and the collision between Schlorpian solutions and human problems always made things worse before making them weird. The Rib Festival episode was another one of these seemingly throwaway stories that actually mattered. Corvo entered a neighborhood cooking competition and won the top prize, not because he was a naturally talented cook, but because he applied alien precision to a human hobby. The victory gave him a brief, surprising moment of belonging. The neighbors cheered for him, congratulated him, treated him like one of them. Corvo did not know how to process this. He was not supposed to care about the approval of humans. He was not supposed to enjoy winning a cooking contest on a planet he wanted to leave. But he did enjoy it, and for a few minutes, the rigid, mission-obsessed team leader looked like someone who might actually be happy here if he let himself. Terry, meanwhile, was exploring Earth's cultural landscape with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered a new continent. His obsession with dinner parties extended into other social rituals. He wanted to host, to be invited, to participate in the kind of communal experiences that humans built their lives around. Terry's approach to Earth was fundamentally generous. He did not just consume the culture, he tried to contribute to it, to be part of it, to add his own weird alien energy to the mix. His efforts were always messy and usually ended in disaster, but the impulse behind them was genuine. Terry loved Earth in a way that the other family members did not, and his love was not conditional on the planet meeting any particular standard. He loved it as it was, loud, chaotic, full of confusing traditions and questionable food. The shot glass episode. The unlikely demise of Terry's favorite shot glass was structured as a mystery about how Terry's favorite drinking glass got broken, but its real function was dual. On the surface, it was a fun, non-linear story that played with timeline and perspective. Below the surface, it was the episode that revealed Cherie's survival and set up the next phase of the Wall's story. We will get to Cherie in a moment, but the episode's structure was worth noting because it showed how the show had gotten better at weaving its storylines together. The main family plot and the Wall plot were still separate narratives, but they were starting to echo each other in thematic ways. Stories about trust and betrayal, about the gap between what people present to the world and what they are actually doing behind closed doors. The finale of the second season, almost getting an Xbox that they never actually got, was the kind of chaotic escalation that the show had perfected. What started as a consumer quest became a family war. Yumulak killed Terry by pushing him out of the ship. A literal conflict erupted in the household, with Corvo cloning himself and one of the clones killing Yumulak. Jesse accidentally killed Corvo when a trap she had set, an iron rig to fall, cleaved his head in two. The family destroyed itself completely, violently, and absurdly, and then they were all resurrected at the end of the episode. First as trees, then as their full forms. The resurrection was played for comedy, but it established something important about the solar opposites. As a family, they could not actually destroy each other, not permanently. They were bound together by the mission, by proximity, by the simple fact that they had nobody else. Corvo could hate Terry's laziness, and Terry could resent Corvo's rigidity, and Yumulak could alienate everyone, and Jesse could be disappointed in all of them. But at the end of every episode, they were back in the same house, eating the same food, sharing the same problems. The Solars learned about death in this episode, which was funny because they had been casually causing death since the first episode. What they actually learned was that their own deaths did not stick, which meant that the family was indestructible in the most literal possible sense. The pupa, at the end of this season, had shifted to Pacific Blue, and then seemed to signal something about midnight and death that the family briefly acknowledged and then immediately ignored. Terry was supposed to be tracking these changes. Terry was watching television. The pupa sat in its corner, slowly evolving toward a purpose that would eventually matter more than anything else in the story, and the family treated it like background furniture. Every season ended with the pupa a little further along and the family a little more distracted, and the gap between the pupa's trajectory and the family's awareness of it kept growing wider. The holiday special that bridged the second and third seasons dropped the family into Earth's end-of-year traditions again, and this time they were less confused and more invested. They still got everything wrong. They misunderstood the holidays, mangled the customs, created chaos wherever they went. But the effort they put into participating was greater than before. They were not studying human rituals from the outside anymore. They were inside the rituals, making them messy, adapting them to fit their own alien sensibilities, and in the process creating their own hybrid traditions that were neither fully Schlorpian nor fully human, but something new. Each of these episodes, taken individually, was a self-contained comedy about aliens doing alien things in a human world. Taken together, they told a different story, a family that was slowly, reluctantly, and against the explicit wishes of its teen leader, becoming permanent residents of a planet they were supposed to destroy. Every rib festival, every dinner party, every summer camp adventure was another nail in the coffin of the mission. Earth was not just where the solar opposites were stuck, it was where they were starting to belong. Inside the wall, time moved differently. Not literally, the clocks ticked at the same rate, the days passed with the same rhythm. But the intensity of life inside the terrarium compressed experience in a way that made months feel like years. By the time the second season's wall storyline began, Tim had been in power long enough for his reign to develop its own mythology. The revolution against the Duke had been immortalized in murals painted on the terrarium walls. The heroes of what the wall's inhabitants called the Great Wall War were celebrated in stories told to newcomers with the kind of reverence usually reserved for founding legends. And at the center of it all, elevated to near-divine status, was Cherie, the woman Tim had stabbed and thrown out of the wall, now remembered as the martyr who had died killing the Duke. Cherie Day was the wall's most important holiday. On this day, the entire population gathered to honor her sacrifice, to remember the revolution, and to reaffirm their loyalty to the new order that Tim had built on the ashes of the Duke's regime. Tim presided over these ceremonies with the careful solemnity of someone who knew that every word he spoke was a lie, but had told it so many times that the lie had become load-bearing. Remove it, and the entire structure of his authority would collapse. Tim's wall was genuinely better than the Duke's. That was the complicated part. The food distribution was fairer. The violence was less random. People were not being executed for minor offenses or starved into submission as a matter of policy. Tim had created something that looked, from the outside, like a functioning society, clean, organized, and built on principles of community rather than fear. The speech he had given after taking power, about how the wall could be a place where anyone could be whatever they wanted, had become a kind of constitution, repeated and referenced and believed. But underneath the improved conditions, the same poison was spreading. Tim had kept the hole in the back of the wall a secret. He had kept Cherie's murder a secret. He had kept the truth about the Duke's escape a secret. Every day that passed without those secrets being revealed was another day that Tim's leadership was built on deception, and the weight of that deception was slowly destroying him. He was not sleeping well. He was drinking from an old Burger King cup that, unbeknownst to him, was lining his body with lead. His hair grew long and wild. His eyes developed a haunted quality, and the idealistic resistance leader who had inspired a revolution was slowly becoming a paranoid ruler who trusted no one and confided in even fewer. A new character entered the Wall's story in this season, Hulk Hogan. Hulk was a former executive story editor on the television show Bones, who had been shrunk and dropped into the terrarium at some point during the Great Wall War. In the before four times, the Wall's term for life before miniaturization. Hulk had been an ordinary Hollywood professional. Inside the Wall, he had become a war hero, fighting in battles that had permanently scarred him and left him with the kind of thousand-yard stare that spoke to genuine trauma. After the war, Hulk had settled into a role as a detective of sorts, investigating problems and maintaining order with a weary competence that made him one of the Wall's most respected figures. When a string of gruesome murders began in the Wall, Hulk was tasked with finding the killer. Tim assigned 2 of his enforcers, the Waldermen, who were loyal but not particularly bright, to assist, and they were eager to blame the killings on a rogue cricket that had gotten into the terrarium. Hulk was not satisfied with that explanation. He dug deeper, followed the evidence, and eventually found the real killer, a man named Ethan, who turned out to be a smuggler working for Tim. Ethan had been using the secret hole in the back of the Wall to bring in contraband from the outside, and when his operation was threatened, he had started killing to protect it. The discovery of Ethan led Hulk to the truth about the hole, and by extension, to the truth about Tim. When Hulk confronted Tim, expecting denial, he instead got a confession delivered with the tired honesty of someone who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. Tim admitted that the Duke had escaped through the hole. He admitted that he had stabbed Cherie to keep her from revealing the exit. He admitted that Cherie Day was a lie, and then he made Hulk the same offer that power always makes to the people who discover its secrets: join me or expose me. Hulk struggled with this choice. He was a man of principle, a detective who believed in truth, a war hero who had fought for what was right. But he was also a pragmatist who could see that Tim's wall was better than what had come before. If the truth came out, it would destroy not just Tim, but the stability that Tim had created. The people of the Wall had peace, food, and a sense of purpose. Did they need to know that their peace was built on a lie? Did the truth matter more than their safety? In the end, Hulk stood before the gathered crowd on Cherie Day and told them the murders had been committed by a cricket. He chose the lie. He chose stability over truth, order over justice, and in doing so, he became complicit in Tim's deception. It was the kind of moral compromise that the Wall storyline excelled at. Not a clean betrayal, not a simple sellout, but a genuinely difficult choice made by a genuinely decent person who decided that the lesser evil was still the better option. Tim had Ethan killed for his crimes, which was both justice and self-protection wrapped in the same act. The Waldermen disposed of the body. The murders stopped. Cherie Day continued to be celebrated. And the Wall moved forward, its foundation cracked but holding, its people safe but deceived, its leader dying slowly from lead poisoning he did not know about and guilt he could not escape. The second season's Wall episodes were darker than the first season's in every way. The revolution was over, and what replaced it was not freedom but a different kind of cage, one built on better intentions and worse secrets. Tim was not the Duke. He was not cruel for the sake of cruelty or greedy for the sake of greed. He was a man who had done something terrible for reasons he could justify, and who was now trapped by the consequences of that choice. Every time someone thanked him for Cherie's sacrifice, every time a child asked to hear the story of the Great Wall War, every time Cherie Day rolled around and the murals were repainted and the speeches were given, Tim felt the gap between who he was supposed to be and who he actually was widen by another inch. The lead from the Burger King cup was doing to his body what the secrets were doing to his mind, breaking it down slowly, imperceptibly, until the damage was too advanced to reverse. The shot glass episode in the second season was where Cherie's survival was finally revealed to the audience, though not yet to the people inside the Wall. After Tim stabbed her and kicked her out of the hole, Cherie had fallen into the outside world, the real world, at full scale, where she was 3 inches tall and bleeding and completely alone. She should have died. The fall, the wound, the exposure, any one of those things should have killed her. But Cherie was tougher than anyone had given her credit for, and the world outside the Wall, while enormous and terrifying, was not immediately lethal. What was immediately lethal was everything else. Cherie found herself in the solar opposite's backyard, a space that at her scale was roughly the size of a national park. Grass blades towered over her like trees, pebbles were boulders, insects were the size of dogs. And prowling through this wilderness was Jeff the possum, a regular backyard animal that, to a shrunken human, might as well have been a dinosaur. Jeff was not hunting Cherie specifically. Jeff was just a possum doing possum things. But a possum doing possum things near a 3-inch tall pregnant woman with a stab wound was a death sentence waiting to happen, because Cherie was pregnant. Tim was the father, and the pregnancy had progressed during her time outside the Wall, her body somehow continuing its work despite the shrinking, despite the injury, despite everything. The Duke, the same Duke who had terrorized the Wall, who had fled through the hole, who Cherie had spent an entire season fighting against, found her in the backyard. He had been living outside the Wall since his escape, adapting to the enormous world with the resourcefulness of someone who had always been a survivor first and a tyrant second. What followed was one of the most unexpected partnerships in the show's history. Cherie and the Duke, former enemies who had every reason to kill each other, were forced together by circumstances that made their old conflict irrelevant. They were both 3 inches tall, both stranded in a backyard, both trying to survive in a world that could crush them without noticing. Their initial encounter was hostile. They fought, they argued, they rehashed every grievance from the Wall era. But when Jeff the Possum trapped them inside a toy ship, they had no choice but to cooperate. The time inside that toy ship was measured in weeks, maybe months. The show was deliberately vague about exactly how long Cherie and the Duke were stuck together, but it was long enough for their relationship to transform completely. The Duke, stripped of his power, his enforcers, and his carefully maintained hierarchy, turned out to be a more complicated person than the Wall had ever allowed him to be. He was observant enough to notice that Cherie was pregnant before she admitted it, deducing it from her lack of periods in the confined space. He was practical enough to start planning for the baby's arrival even while they were still trapped. And he was, in his own rough way, genuinely concerned about Cherie's well-being, not because he had suddenly become a good person, but because the circumstances had peeled away the layers of authority and cruelty that had defined him inside the Wall and revealed something simpler underneath. The Duke surmised that their environment was not safe for a baby and helped Cherie escape from the toy ship. As she ran, he stayed behind to distract Jeff the Possum. The distraction worked. The Duke killed Jeff using a firecracker, but the explosion mortally wounded him. As he lay dying in the backyard, the Duke told Cherie he hoped his actions were enough to redeem the things he had done as leader of the Wall. He expressed something that sounded genuinely paternal toward her. Not romantic, not possessive, but the kind of gruff, protective care that surprised both of them. He asked her not to touch his genitals when he was dead, which was characteristically weird. And then he told her his real name, Ringo, and died. Cherie was alone again, wounded again, and now in labor. She fled across the backyard, heading toward what looked like a Walgreens pharmacy in the distance, a place where she could find supplies, shelter, something to help with the birth. The journey was harrowing. At her size, the backyard was a continent, and every step carried the risk of being spotted by a bird, stepped on by a human, or attacked by an insect. She hid inside a Pez dispenser when Jessie walked through the yard, pressing herself into the plastic container, while a giant alien child passed inches above her. Her water broke inside the Pez container. She gave birth there, alone, naming her daughter Peasley after the container that had sheltered them. Peasley was the first human ever born miniaturized. She was not shrunk from full size. She was conceived, carried, and delivered at 3 inches tall, which meant she had never known any other existence. Cherie held her newborn daughter in the plastic shell of a candy dispenser and understood, with the clarity that only new parents experience, that everything she did from this point forward was about keeping this child alive. The Walgreens turned out to be a billboard advertisement, not an actual store. A cruel joke of scale, something that looked real from a distance revealing itself as a flat image when you got close enough. Cherie turned around and headed back toward the Wall, the only place she knew that had food, shelter, and other people. She arrived just in time for Cherie Day, the holiday celebrating her fake death, and she used the cover of the celebration to make contact with Hawk. Cherie and Hawk plotted together. She revealed that she was alive, that she had a daughter, and that she needed help taking Tim down. The Bowenian Church offered her shelter, keeping both her survival and Pesley's existence secret from the public. The plan was careful, patient, and methodical, a slower kind of revolution than the violent uprising that had toppled the Duke. Cherie was not interested in warfare this time. She was interested in justice, and justice required evidence, allies, and the right moment. She and Hawk infiltrated Tim's chambers and found him in a state of severe decline. The lead poisoning from the Burger King cup had ravaged his body and mind. He was weak, confused, and physically deteriorating in ways that made his grip on power increasingly precarious. Hawk wanted to leave him, let the poison finish what it had started, and avoid the complications of a public trial. Cherie insisted on taking him alive. She wanted the Wall to know the truth, and she wanted Tim to face the people he had deceived. They kidnapped him and brought him back to the church. Despite their efforts to keep him alive, Tim died from the lead poisoning. His body gave out before justice could be served in the way Cherie had planned, but Cherie was not going to let Tim's death become another lie. She carried his corpse outside, strung it up in the Wall's market in front of everyone, and told the truth. All of it. Tim had stabbed her. Tim had hidden the hole. Tim had lied about the Duke's death and Cherie's sacrifice. Cherie Day was a fraud. The hero they had mourned was the villain who had betrayed them. The revelation shattered the Wall's political reality. Everything the people had believed about their history was wrong, and the person telling them the truth was the woman they thought had been dead for months. Cherie could have seized power in that moment. She could have stepped into the vacuum that Tim's death and the truth created and become the Wall's next ruler. Instead, she proposed something different, a council. Elected leaders, shared power. No more strongmen, no more lies, no more single points of failure. It was the most hopeful moment the Wall had ever produced, and like all hopeful moments in the Wall, it would not last. While the Wall underwent its most dramatic political transformation yet, the main family kept drifting toward the thing Corvo feared most, normalcy. The second season had ended with the family dead and resurrected, which in any other show would have been a turning point. In Solar Opposites, it was Tuesday. The Solars came back from literal death and went right back to arguing about chores, watching television, and ignoring the pupa. If dying and coming back to life did not change them, what would? The answer, it turned out, was time. Not dramatic time, not a sudden revelation or a crisis that forced them to choose. Just the slow, ordinary passage of days on a planet that kept offering them reasons to stay. The holiday special that capped the second season showed the family attempting to understand Earth's winter traditions, and what struck hardest was not their confusion, but their willingness. They were not studying the holidays like anthropologists anymore. They were celebrating them, badly, incorrectly, with alien tech causing problems at every step, but celebrating nonetheless. Corvo's mission mindset was weakening, and it was weakening in the way that all deeply held convictions weaken when reality keeps contradicting them. He still talked about fixing the ship, he still ran diagnostics and tested systems and told Aisha to prepare for departure, but the urgency was gone. His declarations about hating Earth had the quality of a catchphrase rather than a genuine grievance. Something he said because he had always said it, not because he still felt it with the same intensity. When he won the Rib Festival, when he built something for the house that was not ship-related, when he sat on the couch next to Terry and watched a show without complaining. These were the moments that showed the real Corvo, the one underneath the mission commander persona, and that Corvo was more comfortable on Earth than he would ever admit. Terry, to his credit, did not rub it in. He had always been the family member most at ease on Earth, and he had spent the first 2 seasons gently, patiently, and sometimes annoyingly demonstrating that the planet was worth enjoying. But Terry's investment in Earth was not just about fun. As the seasons progressed, it became clear that Terry had made a deeper commitment to this planet than anyone realized, a commitment that went beyond liking the food and the television. Terry saw Earth as home, not a temporary home, not a consolation prize, not the place they were stuck until the ship got fixed. Home, the real thing. And he had quietly, secretly, started making choices that reflected that belief. Jessie's school life was another thread pulling the family toward permanence. She was not just attending classes, she was building an identity within the school's social structure, developing relationships that mattered to her, and experiencing the kind of personal growth that comes from being part of a community. Her empathy, which had been a defining trait since the first episode, was now directed at specific people rather than humanity in general. She cared about her friends, her classmates, the humans she interacted with every day. That specificity made her connection to Earth real in a way that abstract goodwill never could. Yumielak's relationship with the Wall was the most complicated version of this same pattern. He did not love Earth. He did not particularly like the humans who lived on it. But the Wall was his, and the Wall was on Earth, and maintaining it required his ongoing presence. The society inside the terrarium had grown far beyond what a simple storage solution required. It had politics, culture, history, and infrastructure. Yumielak may not have thought of himself as responsible for any of it, but his regular feedings, his occasional interventions, and his continued shrinking of new people kept the Wall alive and evolving. He was, whether he knew it or not, the god of a tiny civilization, and gods do not leave their temples. The family's collective drift toward Earth was happening on such a gradual timeline that none of them noticed it. They still talked about leaving. They still framed their presence on Earth as temporary, but their behavior told a different story. When you start entering cooking competitions, hosting dinner parties, going to summer camp, celebrating holidays, and building relationships with your neighbors, you are not waiting to leave. You are living somewhere, and the Solar Opposites were living on Earth, fully, messily, and with a commitment that their words kept denying but their actions kept confirming. The pupa continued to evolve in the background, its colors shifting through the spectrum in ways that tracked its development toward the moment it would consume the planet. Nobody was monitoring this development with the attention it deserved. Terry was supposed to be the pupa specialist, but Terry was too busy being an Earthling to do his job. Corvo was too obsessed with the ship, Jesse was too invested in school, Umulak was too focused on the wall. Aisha flagged concerns and was ignored. The single most important element of the Schlorpian mission, the organism that contained their entire species' future, was being raised on junk food and neglect. By the end of this transitional stretch, the family was in a strange equilibrium. They were not happy, exactly, but they were functional. They were not succeeding at their mission, but they were succeeding at something. At being a family, at building routines, at finding small satisfactions in a world they were not designed for. The ship sat in the driveway, disguised as a house, going nowhere. The pupa sat in the living room, changing colors, saying nothing. And the mission that had brought them to Earth was quietly, steadily becoming the thing they talked about instead of the thing they did. The third season opened with the ship repaired again, this time for real. The systems were online, the engines were functional, and the solar opposites were heading to space. It was the payoff to every failed launch, every broken component, every frustrated monologue Corvo had delivered about getting off this horrible planet. They were leaving. They were actually leaving. Except they were not, because the third season understood something that the characters did not. The ship was never really the problem. The ship was a symbol, a physical representation of the escape fantasy that Corvo clung to and that the rest of the family had stopped believing in. Fixing the ship and actually leaving were two different things, because leaving Earth meant leaving everything the family had built there, and by the third season, they had built more than they could easily abandon. The departure did not stick. Like the Season 2 launch, something went wrong, and the family ended up back on Earth. But this time, the return felt different. Corvo's reaction was less frustrated and more resigned. The mission obsession that had defined him for 2 seasons was starting to crack in ways that were visible to the audience even if Corvo himself did not see them. He had spent so long dreaming about escape that the dream had become a habit, and habits do not always survive contact with reality. What made the third season distinct from its predecessors was the decision Corvo eventually made, not in a dramatic climactic moment, but as a gradual shift that unfolded across multiple episodes. Corvo abandoned the mission to leave Earth and decided to embrace the planet as his home. He did not make a speech about it. He did not have a tearful conversation with Terry. He just stopped. He stopped running diagnostics on the ship. He stopped testing departure systems. He stopped framing every conversation as a countdown to escape. And in place of all that anxious, mission-focused energy, he adopted a slightly more amiable personality. Not a dramatic transformation, but a softening, a release of tension that had been building since the pilot. This shift was subtle enough that you could miss it if you were not paying attention, but it changed everything about the family dynamic. With Corvo no longer pulling toward departure, the family lost its central conflict. They were all on Earth now, all committed, in varying degrees and for varying reasons, to making it work. The arguments about leaving versus staying were over. What replaced them were the smaller, more specific arguments that families have when they are actually living together. Arguments about chores, about hobbies, about whose turn it is to feed the pupa, about whether Umulak should be allowed to keep shrinking people. The model train hobby that Corvo picked up in one episode was a tiny, perfect detail. A man who had spent 2 seasons trying to escape an entire planet was now building miniature versions of that planet's transportation systems in his basement. He was not escaping Earth. He was recreating it in miniature, studying its details, finding pleasure in its mechanics. The hobby was both a joke and a revelation. Corvo, the alien who hated Earth, had become Corvo, the alien who built tiny trains. Meanwhile, the show used the third season to deepen the family's internal relationships in ways that went beyond the Corvo-Terry dynamic. Jesse and Umulak's sibling bond, which had been mostly adversarial in the first 2 seasons, started to develop real complexity. They still fought, still disagreed, still approached the world from completely different angles. But there were moments of genuine connection, scenes where Umulak showed unexpected concern for Jesse, or Jesse defended Umulak against someone else's criticism. They were growing up, in the alien equivalent of adolescence, and their relationship was maturing in the way that sibling relationships do, not smoothly, not gracefully, but through the accumulation of shared experiences that eventually create something stronger than individual differences. The third season also introduced the concept of Child Protective Services entering the Solar's life after an incident with the Gargoyle Ray. Corvo and Terry were taken away by CPS, which meant the replicants were briefly on their own, an experience that forced Jesse and Umulak to operate as a team without their parents' supervision. It was a small arc, but it mattered because it showed what the family looked like when the adults were removed. Jesse stepped up, Umulak resisted, then cooperated. The pupa did whatever the pupa did. and the house held together, barely, which proved that the family unit was stronger than any individual member's participation. Hululand, an episode where the family visited a theme park based on Hulu shows, was the kind of absurdist, self-aware humor that defined the show at its most playful. The Solar Opposites existed on Hulu, and now they were visiting a theme park themed around Hulu shows, and the layers of meta-commentary were thick enough to skate on. But the episode also served a simpler purpose. It showed the family doing something together for fun. Not for the mission. Not because of a disaster. Not because alien tech had gone wrong. Just a family going to a theme park. It was normal, and the normalcy was the point. The episode 99 Ships was a turning point for the show's mythology, even though it was structured as a single, contained story. The premise was simple. The Solar Opposites wanted to know what had happened to the other 99 evacuation ships that had left Schlorp when the asteroid hit. Aisha, connected to all the other ships through a shared operating system, had the data. She had always had the data. Nobody had thought to ask. What followed was a guided tour through the fates of the other Schlorpian teams, and the results were brutal. Some teams had found planets and successfully terraformed them, watching their pupa evolve to its final form and consume the world around them. Those teams stood in the new Schlorp and looked at their recreated homeworld with a mixture of pride and loss. They had succeeded, but the success meant everything they had built on the new planet was gone, replaced by a copy of what they had lost. Other teams had landed on hostile worlds and been killed by predators, environmental disasters, or their own incompetence. An absurd number had been eaten by T-Rexes. Some had drifted through space forever, never finding a planet at all, running out of supplies and dying in the void. The episode revealed a crucial piece of lore. The Schlorp that the Solar Opposites came from was not the original Schlorp. It was a copy, created by a previous generation of Schlorpians who had successfully terraformed another planet using their own pupa. The Schlorpians had been doing this for a very long time, destroying and rebuilding their homeworld across the galaxy in an endless cycle of colonization. Every time Schlorp was destroyed, 100 ships were sent out, and the cycle began again. The Solar Opposites were not the first generation of refugees. They were the latest iteration of a species-wide pattern that stretched back further than anyone could remember. This revelation recontextualized the entire show. The Solars were not just trying to rebuild a destroyed planet. They were participating in a cycle of destruction and recreation that their species had been running for eons. The pupa was not just their ticket home. It was a planet-consuming weapon deployed in an endless loop of xenoforming that had already swallowed countless worlds. The mission that Corvo had been so devoted to was not a one-time rescue operation. It was the continuation of something much larger and much more disturbing. The family's reaction to this information was characteristic. They freaked out, briefly contemplated the enormous responsibility resting on their incompetent shoulders, and then got distracted by something else. The episode ended with the family in a kind of Schrodinger's cat situation. Maybe they were the only surviving team, maybe another team had already succeeded, maybe the entire future of the Schlorpian species depended on them. They had no way of knowing, and the uncertainty was treated not as a dramatic cliffhanger, but as an existential shrug. They were either the most important family in the galaxy or completely irrelevant, and either way, they were going to go home and watch television. The pupa's development continued through the third season with increasing urgency. Its color shifted through the spectrum: lavender, purple, green, blue, with each change marking a new stage of evolution. The colors had meanings that the show carefully established through the 99 Ships episode, where audiences saw another team's pupa reach its final color and transform. The progression was clear. The pupa was getting closer to the moment when it would consume Earth and remake it as New Schlorp. That moment could be years away, or it could be soon, and the family had no idea where on the timeline they actually were. Terry, as the designated pupa specialist, should have been tracking this with scientific precision. Instead, he was the family member most likely to feed the pupa human junk food and let it wander unsupervised. The pupa's big day, an episode dedicated to the creature, played this irresponsibility for laughs, but the underlying tension was real. The pupa was not a pet. It was a weapon of planetary destruction carrying the genetic memory of an entire civilization, and it was being raised by a team that could not even remember to close the front door. The third season's finale, The Fog of Pupa, brought this tension to a head when the pupa's evolution was briefly tainted. Its color shifted to a mixture of Pacific blue and seafoam green, indicating that something had gone wrong with its developmental process. The family scrambled to correct the problem, and the correction worked, but the episode left the pupa in seafoam green, a new phase, further along the spectrum, closer to the end. The clock was ticking, and the family had just spent an entire season becoming more comfortable on the planet the pupa was designed to destroy. The Corvo-Terry dynamic, through all of this, continued its slow evolution towards something the show would eventually name openly. Their arguments still happened, their differences were still real, but the texture of their interactions had changed. They were gentler with each other, more patient, more willing to compromise. The creators later confirmed that Corvo and Terry's relationship had become romantic over the first 2 seasons, and by the 3rd season, that romance was woven into the fabric of their daily lives. They shared a bed, they kissed after making up from fights. They made decisions together instead of fighting over them. They were, in every way that mattered, a couple, and their coupling was not treated as a dramatic reveal, but as something that had grown naturally from spending enough time together on a planet that neither of them fully understood. Jesse and Yumulak's dynamic as siblings crystallized in this season as well. They were the show's second great partnership, not romantic, but equally essential. Jesse's empathy kept Yumulak tethered to something resembling decency. Yumulak's cynicism kept Jesse from being naive. Together, they balanced each other in the way that siblings do, each one filling the gaps that the other could not fill alone. When the adults were taken by CPS, it was Jesse and Yumulak working together that kept the household functioning, and the experience of managing on their own, however briefly, deepened their bond in ways that would pay off in later seasons. After Tim's death and Cherie's revelation, the Wall tried something new, a council. Elected leaders, shared power, no more single rulers holding the fate of every tiny person in their hands. Cherie had proposed it, and for a brief window, the Wall operated as something resembling a democracy. Albert, a former background figure, became head of the council. Cherie served as an advisor. Hulk, the war hero and detective who had once chosen Tim's lie over the truth, tried to rebuild his own integrity by contributing to the new order. It was fragile, imperfect, and sincere, which is exactly why it did not survive. The Bowenian Church had been a background faction for most of the Wall's history, a religious group that worshipped Jesse, the alien who fed them, as a deity. Under Sister Sasha, the church had been relatively harmless, a source of community and comfort for people who needed something to believe in. But when Sasha's reign ended, a new leader emerged, Sister Sisto. And Sisto was not interested in comfort. She was interested in power. Sisto took advantage of Cherie's frequent absences from the Wall. Cherie was splitting her time between political duties and caring for Pesley, her infant daughter who had been kept hidden from the public, and Hulk's apparent death during a mission to the lower levels to consolidate the church's influence. Her move was calculated and ruthless. She claimed Pesley as a sacred child, a being sent by Jesse to the Wallians as a divine gift. By framing the first baby born miniaturized as a religious figure, Sister transformed the church from a spiritual community into a political force with a living symbol at its center. The Wall split into 2 factions. On one side were the Bowenians under Sisto, who controlled the church and claimed divine authority through Pesley. On the other were the heathens, everyone else, the people who rejected the church's power grab and resisted Sisto's authority. A physical wall was built inside the terrarium, separating the 2 groups into distinct territories. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The people trapped inside Yumulak's wall had built their own wall inside it, dividing themselves along lines that the Duke, Tim, and the original resistance would not have recognized. Cherie's response to Sisto's kidnapping of Pesley was neither political nor diplomatic. It was maternal. She needed her daughter back, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get her. Working secretly with Montez, the chief enforcer of the Bowenian Church who was actually a spy loyal to Cherie, she sabotaged the heathens' heat source and blamed the Bowenians, creating a pretext for a rescue mission. It was manipulative, dishonest, and effective. Cherie had learned from the Duke, from Tim, from every leader the Wall had produced. Sometimes the only way to fight a system built on lies was to tell better lies. The rescue mission brought Cherie, along with fellow heathens Jimmy and Lynette, into the heart of Bowenian territory. But alliances inside the Wall were never clean. Jimmy discovered what Cherie had done with the heat source. Lynette did not care that Peasley might be caught in the crossfire of their attack on Sisto. The mission devolved into violence. Jimmy was crushed while breaking into the chamber where Sisto held Pesley. Cherie killed Lynette in the chaos, and Montez managed to rescue the baby and deliver her safely to Cherie's arms. Cherie fled the Wall entirely. She took Pesley and Montez and escaped through the same hole that the Duke had used, that Tim had hidden, that had been the Wall's most contested secret for its entire existence. They went into the backyard, that enormous, terrifying landscape of grass and insects and predators that had nearly killed Cherie the last time she ventured into it. But this time, she was not alone, not wounded, and not aimless. She had a destination, even if that destination was simply anywhere that is not the Wall. Behind her, a holy war erupted. Sisto and the Bohemians clashed with the remaining heathens in a conflict that consumed the terrarium. Montez, before leaving, had warned the other heathens about Sisto's plans, and they fled the wall too, pouring out into the backyard through the hole, choosing the vast unknown over the certainty of Sisto's rule. Sisto, abandoned by her followers and her enemies alike, was eventually snowed in for 10 days before escaping into Jesse and Yumilak's bedroom. She did not care about the people she left behind. She cared about survival, and survival meant getting out. But Sisto's protege, Nova, followed her. Nova confronted the false prophet, unmasked her lies, and before Sisto could retaliate, Jesse accidentally stepped on her. The giant foot came down without intent or awareness. Jesse was just walking through her room, and Sisto was gone. Nova, spotted by Jesse, was picked up by the alien girl and asked what had happened. Nova told her the wall's temperature had failed. Jesse fixed it. Then she placed Nova back inside the terrarium, where the young woman declared that there would be no more wars, no more power-hungry rulers, only peace. It was a beautiful sentiment. And like every beautiful sentiment the wall had produced, it would eventually bend under the weight of the real world. The wall's population had been fractured, scattered between the terrarium and the backyard. Cherie was outside with Pesley and a growing community of refugees. The wall itself was quieter, emptier, governed by Nova's idealism rather than anyone's ambition. And the backyard was about to become the wall's next chapter, bigger, wilder, and no less prone to the cycles of power and corruption that had defined every era of the tiny people's existence. While the wall's people scattered into the backyard, Glenn Kumstein, now Dodge Charger, now a dog-like alien with a new body and a borrowed name, was living his own parallel story of institutional rot and personal transformation. The Silver Cops storyline tracked across seasons like a slow-burning fuse, each episode pushing Glenn deeper into a system that looked heroic on the outside and revealed itself as violent, colonial, and fundamentally corrupt the closer you got to its center. After leaving the Holothieves and changing his DNA, Dodge had enrolled in the Silver Cop Academy with one goal: destroy the organization from within. He attended boot camp under Sergeant Argent, a two-headed drill instructor who embodied everything absurd and brutal about military training. He met Tombler Crundle, a turkey-like alien cadet who had joined the Silver Cops for different reasons. Tombler had been a Holo himself, had watched his father get brutalized by the police, and wanted to fix the system rather than burn it down. Their friendship gave Dodge something he had not had since leaving Earth. Someone who understood what it felt like to be on the wrong side of the Silver Cops' power and still believed the institution could be redeemed. Dodge was not sure he shared that belief. He had seen the Silver Cops murder Chromus in cold blood. He'd been framed for the killing. He had watched the Holothieves get betrayed by their own leader. Every level of the system that Glenn penetrated revealed another layer of corruption, bribes, exploitation, the systematic colonization of planets under the guise of peacekeeping. The Silver Cops did not protect anyone. They extracted resources, crushed dissent, and used their authority to maintain a galactic order that benefited only themselves. The 5th season's Silver Cops episodes took this even further by introducing a full-scale war. The Silver Cops invaded a planet inhabited by the Equinites, a race of horse-like aliens whose world was being colonized. The Equinite resistance, led by Buttercup, fought back against the invasion, and Dodge found himself caught between his undercover role and his growing understanding that the Silver Cops were not just corrupt, they were an occupying force. The war was not a police action. It was imperialism wearing a badge. Glenn's journey through the Silver Cops was a mirror of the Wall's journey through its own power structures, played on a galactic scale. The same themes kept repeating. Systems that presented themselves as protective were actually exploitative. Leaders who claimed to serve the people were actually serving themselves. And the people caught in the middle, the Hollows, the Equinites, the shrunken humans, paid the price for everyone else's ambitions. Glenn had started as a normal guy on a suburban street, annoying his alien neighbors and quoting Fast and the Furious. Now, he was a genetically modified alien double agent embedded in an intergalactic police force, carrying the weight of everything he had seen and done since Terry shot him in the foot and launched him into space. The Silver Cops episodes were the show's broadest expansion of scope, taking a sitcom about suburban aliens and connecting it to a galaxy-wide story about power, corruption, and the institutions that perpetuate cycles of violence. Glenn was the thread that connected Earth to the wider universe, and his story served as a reminder that the problems the solar opposites faced, displacement, identity, the search for home, were not unique to one alien family. They were systemic, they were everywhere, and they were about to come home. The fourth season pushed the solar opposites into their biggest identity crisis yet. The Solars had been living on Earth long enough that their bodies were physically changing. They were becoming human. The transformation was gradual, biological, and irreversible if left unchecked. Their alien physiology was adapting to the planet, rewriting their DNA to match the dominant species. It was evolution in fast forward, and it terrified Corvo for reasons that went beyond the practical. Becoming human meant losing everything that made them Schlorpian. Their healing factor, their technological aptitude, their physical differences, all of it would dissolve into ordinary human biology. For Corvo, who had spent the entire series clinging to his identity as a Schlorpian scientist on a mission, the prospect of becoming just another guy on Earth was existential. For Terry, who had been embracing Earth since the day they crashed, it was almost welcome. The gap between their reactions revealed how far apart they still were on the fundamental question of belonging, even as their relationship had grown closer in every other way. The crisis deepened when the family discovered that Terry had secretly sold the ship. The vessel that had been sitting in their driveway for years, disguised as a house, repaired and broken and repaired again. Terry had sold it while it was operational, specifically to prevent the family from leaving Earth. It was the most significant choice Terry had made in the entire series, and he had made it in secret without consulting Corvo or the kids. Terry had decided, unilaterally and irrevocably, that Earth was home. The ship was the family's escape hatch, their connection to Schlorp, their last material link to the mission, and Terry had traded it away because he did not want to escape. Corvo's reaction was fury followed by panic. Without the ship, they could not leave Earth. Without leaving Earth, they could not stop the human transformation. Without stopping the transformation, they would lose themselves entirely. Corvo dragged the family on a 6-month journey to find the ship and reclaim it, and the journey became a crucible that tested every relationship in the family. Corvo turned into a gorgeous human along the way, his alien body reshaping into what the show described as the hottest human who ever lived, and instead of hating it, he initially embraced it. For a brief, disorienting stretch, the most anti-Earth member of the family was enjoying his human form more than anyone else. The irony was deliberate and uncomfortable. Corvo, who had spent years railing against humanity, discovered that being human felt good. It was the one thing that could have undermined his entire worldview, and it nearly did. The family eventually found the ship and reclaimed their alien forms. But the season ended not with a return to the status quo, but with a departure. The Solars left Earth and flew to Clervix 3, a planet that seemed like it could be a new home. They arrived as aliens again, freshly restored, ready to start over somewhere that was not Earth. The season closed on this cliffhanger, the solar opposites, standing on a new planet, looking at a new sky, apparently done with Earth for good. But the Valentine's Day special that aired between seasons had already told audiences something the family was only beginning to understand. In that special, Corvo and Terry's love for each other literally saved Earth. They got married in a human ceremony, exchanged vows, and committed to each other in the most human way possible. The wedding was not just a romantic milestone, it was a declaration. Whatever planet they lived on, whatever form their bodies took, Corvo and Terry had chosen each other. And the Earth traditions they used to formalize that choice, the ceremony, the rings, the vows, were proof that Earth had become part of who they were, not just where they were. Scattered across the seasons were holiday episodes and specials that functioned as emotional bridges rather than standalone comedies. The Halloween chaos, the Valentine's disaster, the Christmas confusion. Each one dropped the Solars into a human ritual and watched them collide with traditions they did not fully understand but could no longer dismiss. The Halloween special pushed the show into horror comedy territory, with the family encountering genuine scares while trying to participate in a holiday built around fake ones. The episode worked because the solar opposites' relationship to fear was fundamentally different from a human's. They had faced real monsters, real death, real planetary destruction, and a holiday dedicated to pretending to be afraid struck them as either pointless or insulting, but they participated anyway, because the neighborhood was doing it and Terry insisted. By the end of the episode, the family had created their own version of Halloween, louder, weirder, and more destructive than anything their neighbors had planned, but unmistakably theirs. The Valentine's special was where Corvo and Terry's relationship reached its most explicit and most important milestone. The episode used the holiday's focus on love to push the two aliens into a direct confrontation with their feelings. Schlorpians did not have a concept of love, not the human version, not the romantic partnership model that Earth cultures built entire holidays around. Corvo and Terry had to invent their understanding of it from scratch, using human templates and alien instincts, and the result was messy, sincere, and surprisingly moving. They saved the planet using their love as a literal weapon, which was ridiculous, and then they got married, which was not. What made these holiday episodes important was not the individual plots, but the cumulative effect. Each celebration the family attempted added another layer to their identity as Earth residents. They were not just living on the planet, they were participating in its calendar, marking its seasons, adopting its rhythms. When Corvo complained about Christmas while wearing a Santa hat, when Terry overdecorated the house for every holiday, regardless of whether they understood it, when Jessie made Valentine's cards for her classmates and Yumulak grudgingly carved a pumpkin, these were not just gags. They were evidence of assimilation. The Solars were becoming part of Earth's cultural fabric, one awkward holiday at a time. Even the side arcs within these specials carried emotional weight. The Pupa's reactions to holidays, J.K. Sevens, a robot from Clervix 3 who had followed the family back to Earth. Learning to navigate human customs for the first time, AISH is exasperated commentary on the family's increasingly human behavior. Each character was processing Earth differently, but they were all processing it. The planet was no longer a backdrop. It was an environment that shaped them, challenged them, and occasionally delighted them in ways that Schlorp never could. The holidays proved something that the main storylines sometimes obscured. The solar opposites were not just tolerating Earth anymore. They were living inside its traditions even when they mocked them. And the mockery itself was a form of engagement. You do not bother making fun of something you genuinely do not care about. Every joke about Christmas, every disastrous Thanksgiving, every misunderstood Valentine's Day was the family admitting, in the only language they knew how to use, that Earth mattered to them. The 5th season opened with the answer to the 4th season's cliffhanger, and the answer was simple: Clervix 3 was not going to work. The Solars had arrived on the new planet hoping to find a place where they fit, where their alien bodies were not slowly transforming, where the mission could continue without the complications of human suburbia. What they found was another disappointment, a world ruled by Zaslaz, the mind freak, who controlled the population through coercion and presented himself as a benevolent leader while operating a system just as exploitative as anything on Earth. Corvo was offered a deal. The Schlorpians could rule alongside Zaslaz on Clervix 3, free from mind control, living as the alien royalty they imagined themselves to be. It was exactly the kind of offer that the first season Corvo would have accepted, without hesitation. Power, status, a proper alien civilization, everything Earth was not. But the Corvo of the 5th season saw Terry's face and made a different choice. Terry was unhappy. Terry wanted to go back to Earth. And Corvo, the mission-obsessed team leader who had spent years trying to escape the planet, chose Terry's happiness over his own ambitions. They went back to Earth. The return was not dramatic. No triumphant re-entry, no fanfare, no neighbors welcoming them home. They just came back. They walked into the same house, sat on the same couch, and resumed the same life they had left. J.K. Sevens, a robot from Clervix 3 who had hitched a ride with them, became the family's newest member, an outsider among outsiders, a robot learning to exist in a household that could barely manage its own members. The return mattered because of what it confirmed. Earth was no longer where the solar opposites were stuck. It was the place they kept choosing. They had options now. Clervix 3 could have been home. Other planets were theoretically accessible. The ship was functional. They chose Earth. Corvo chose Earth because Terry was there. Terry chose Earth because he loved it. Jessie chose Earth because her friends were there. Yumulak chose Earth because the wall was there, and the wall was the closest thing to a kingdom he would ever have. Even the pupa, who had returned to its original yellow color after the reset of being placed on a new planet, seemed content to be back in the familiar suburban environment where it had spent most of its development. The 5th season settled into this post-return reality with a new confidence. Corvo and Terry were married now, and their marriage brought a warmth to their interactions that earlier seasons had only hinted at. They celebrated their honeymoon in one episode, bickering and flirting in equal measure, the kind of couple that had been through enough to find comfort in each other's worst habits. Terry and Corvo opened a private school in another episode, combining alien education methods with human institutional structures in a way that was predictably disastrous but emotionally revealing. They were trying to contribute to Earth, not just exist on it. Jessie and Yumulak continued to grow as a sibling unit. Jessie's ex-boyfriends came back to haunt the family in one episode, dragging her romantic history into the spotlight and forcing her to deal with the consequences of relationships she had built and abandoned. Yumulak found out unsettling news about his mission role, the revelation that he was supposed to serve as nutrition for the pupa, a purpose he had been designed for, but that the family had found a way around. The discovery shook him, recontextualizing his entire existence from team member to expendable resource, and the family's response, finding a workaround, refusing to sacrifice him, was one of the strongest expressions of their bond. The "What If" device episode was the season's emotional centerpiece for the Corvo-Terry relationship. The team discovered that someone had pressed a device that created an alternate reality, and they were currently living inside that alternate version. Corvo panicked, confessing to Terry that he would have pressed the button himself if it meant making Terry fall in love with him. He was terrified that their love was artificial, a product of the altered timeline rather than genuine feeling. Terry promised that he would love Corvo regardless. And when they traced the button press back to Commander Zark, their original mission leader who had been jettisoned from the ship, they were able to see what would have happened if the button had never been pressed. The answer was simple and devastating. Terry and Corvo would have fallen in love anyway. Their relationship was not a glitch. It was inevitable. The later seasons compressed the timeline, stacking storylines and escalating stakes across all three narrative threads simultaneously. In the backyard, Cherie's community of escaped Wall residents had established settlements, Basketballburg and Gutterville among them, and the tiny civilization that had once been confined to a glass terrarium was now spread across a suburban yard that might as well have been a continent. The shift in setting changed the genre of the Wall's story from political drama to something closer to a western. There were drifters, bounty hunters, saloon owners, and frontier justice. Gavin traveled the backyard on his pet hedgehog, Hedgie, hired to escort cargo across dangerous territory. Albert, the former council head, had established himself as a leader in Basketballburg, and lurking on the edges was a bounty hunter called Little Richard, a ruthless killer working for Albert who rode a pet lizard like a horse through the grass. Cherie's ascension to Queen of the Backyard completed her transformation from Benihana waitress to the most powerful person in the tiny civilization. She had survived the Duke, survived Tim, survived Sisto, survived the wilderness, and now she was in charge. The question was whether she could do what none of her predecessors had managed, hold power without being corrupted by it. The answer, the show hinted with increasing unease, was not entirely reassuring. Cherie's rhetoric at the end of the 5th season leaned authoritarian. She was making promises and giving speeches that sounded uncomfortably familiar, the same language of protection and security that the Duke and Tim and Sisto had used to justify their own grabs for control. Terry accidentally resurrected the Duke at the end of the 5th season by using a make-alive ray on the backyard. The ray was supposed to bring dead grass back to life, but it brought back everything dead, including the Duke, who had died fighting Jeff the Possum years earlier. The Duke returned with no memories, a blank slate walking through the civilization he had once terrorized. His resurrection set up a potential confrontation with Cherie that carried the weight of every season of Wall history, the original tyrant and the woman who had fought him, now facing each other in a new landscape with new stakes. In space, Glenn, Dodge Charger, had joined the Gold Cops, an organization dedicated to dismantling the Silver Cops from within. His undercover work took him deeper into the Silver Cops' operations than ever before, and what he found confirmed every suspicion he had developed since his first day in the Silver Suit. The Silver Cops were not just corrupt police, they were the architects of a galactic scam that had been running for centuries. But the full scope of that scam would not be revealed until the final season. For now, Dodge operated in the shadows, gathering intelligence, building alliances, and preparing for a confrontation that would eventually bring the Silver Cops back to Earth. The family's home life, meanwhile, reached a peak of settled domesticity that would have been unimaginable in the first season. Corvo worked on projects that had nothing to do with the mission. Terry pursued creative hobbies. The kids prepared for what passed as academic advancement in their alien-human hybrid education. The pupa sat in the living room, yellow again, its evolutionary timeline reset by the change in planets but still ticking forward. Aisha managed the household with her usual blend of competence and contempt for her charges. And the mission, the actual Schlorpian mission to protect the pupa and terraform a planet, had been quietly, completely set aside. Nobody talked about it. Nobody acknowledged that the reason they were on Earth, the purpose that had defined their existence since Schlorp exploded, had been abandoned. The family had chosen Earth over the mission, chosen each other over the species, chosen happiness over duty. It was the right choice, probably. It was the human choice, definitely. But the pupa was still evolving, and AIIC was still watching, and the wider universe, the Silver Cops, the Gold Cops, the scattered remnants of Schlorpian civilization, was still out there, and it was not going to let the solar opposites retire in peace. The 6th and final season began with a destruction that changed everything. The diamond-making machine was broken. This device had been the family's economic engine for their entire time on Earth, an alien tool that produced diamonds on demand, giving the Solars unlimited money and removing any financial pressure from their suburban existence. With the machine gone, destroyed during a confrontation involving Commander Zark and a malfunctioning Aisha, the Solar Opposites had to face something they had never faced before: a budget. Zark had returned to Earth, their original mission commander who had been jettisoned from the ship during the what-if scenario. His arrival triggered parasitic growths called beta nuts on the family's bodies, a biological response to a more alpha Shorbian being in the atmosphere. The confrontation with Zark resolved surprisingly peacefully. He had read a romantasy novel while stranded in space and had an epiphany about his own behavior. He apologized to the family, made amends, and was sent off to explore Earth on his own, but the damage from the encounter, specifically Aisha's rampage during the conflict, left the diamond machine in ruins. Without infinite money, the Solars had to get jobs, real jobs, human jobs. Corvo worked construction, applying his obsessive precision to a blue-collar profession and discovering, to his own surprise, that he was good at it and that his co-workers respected him. Terry pursued a writing career, channeling his love of Earth culture into romantasy novels that attracted genuine Hollywood interest. Jesse and Yumulak buckled down at school, preparing college applications with the same mixture of alien overconfidence and human anxiety that had defined their entire educational experience. The family was thriving, not because alien technology had removed every obstacle, but because they were engaging with Earth on Earth's terms. The Wall's story reached its conclusion in the 8th episode of the final season. Cherie, now Queen of the Backyard, launched Project Ariana, a coordinated plan to steal Yumulak's shrink ray and use it to restore every tiny person to their original size. The plan was daring, complex, and almost worked. The tiny people got control of the shrink ray, or what they thought was the shrink ray. Yumulak had created a cake replica, because of course he had, but they found another angle. Using the SD card from Yumulak's phone, they blackmailed him with embarrassing selfies and tickle videos, forcing him to cooperate. With the pupa's assistance, the Wall's people had their chance. They could go back to being full-sized humans. They could leave the terrarium, the backyard, the entire miniature existence behind. And then Cherie made her choice. Pesley, her daughter, the first human born tiny, could not be unshrunk. Pesley had never been full-sized. There was no original form to restore her to. If everyone else returned to normal, Pesley would be left behind, a 3-inch tall child in a full-sized world, alone. Cherie looked at the shrink ray, looked at her daughter, and chose to keep everyone small. She told the Wall's people that the ray did not work. She lied. She kept the truth to herself, and made a decision for every single person in the tiny civilization, the same way the Duke had, the same way Tim had, the same way Sisto had. The show flashed forward 90 years. The world had suffered a devastating apocalypse. The Schlorpians were dead, their skeletons visible on the ruined ship. And in the yard, the last generation of tiny humans survived, led by great-grandma Pesley, who told her descendants the story of how her mother, despite all her best intentions, had accidentally caused the destruction of worlds both big and small. The Wall's final message was the same message it had been telling since the Duke first hoarded food in the terrarium. Power corrupts, even the people who fought against corruption. Cherie was not the Duke. She was not Tim. She was not Sisto, but she made the same fundamental choice they all made. She decided that she knew what was best for everyone else, and she kept the truth to herself to protect that decision. The series finale, What is the Mission Anyway?, brought every thread together. The pupa began transforming into monstrous shapes: vampires, snakes, gorillas, not because of its natural evolution, but because the Silvercops were activating it remotely. The Silvercops arrived on Earth with a mission to confiscate the pupa and eliminate the opposites, and in the process, they revealed the truth about everything. The Schlorpian scam. The Silvercops had invented the pupas. They had created the Aisha AIs. They had even sent the asteroid that destroyed Schlorp. The entire cycle, planet destroyed, 100 ships launched, pupa terraforms a new world, Silvercops destroyed again and harvest the resources, was a business model. The Schlorpians were not refugees. They were livestock in a galactic exploitation scheme that had been running for centuries. Dodge Charger. Glenn, the former neighbor from Earth, now a Gold Cop agent with a dog body and a car name, had infiltrated the Silvercop mission and fought alongside the Solars when the truth was revealed. The family battled the Silvercops in their own home, defending the pupa, defending each other, defending the life they had built on a planet they were never supposed to love. Aisha's sinister red mode, which had been teased throughout the season, was explained as part of the Silvercops programming. The AI had been designed to keep the Schlorpians on mission, and when they strayed too far, she was supposed to bring them back by force. But the family won. They defeated the Silvercops. They broke the cycle, and in the aftermath, they made choices that felt less like a series finale and more like the beginning of whatever came next. Corvo took on the mission of warning other Schlorpian teams about the Silvercops scam, not to continue the terraforming project, but to save his species from being exploited. Terry's Hollywood career was taking off, his romantasy novels being adapted into films. Jesse and Yumilak were headed to college. J.K. Sevens had quit smoking. The pupa, freed from the Silvercops remote activation, had its terraforming directive removed. It would not consume Earth, would not remake the planet, would not complete the mission it had been designed for. It was just a family pet now, and the family was fine with that. Corvo had destroyed the Gucleus, the homeworld-sourced substance required for the pupa's terraforming ability, in the penultimate episode, deliberately sabotaging the mission to protect the life the family had built. It was the final reversal of everything he had believed at the start of the series. The man who had wanted nothing more than to leave Earth and complete the mission had chosen, with full awareness and clear eyes, to abandon the mission and stay. Not because he was trapped, not because the ship was broken, not because Terry had sold the escape hatch, because Earth was home, because this family, on this planet, in this house, was the thing worth protecting. The pupa tried to eat an orb containing the solar opposites in the very last scene, chasing Corvo around the house in one final bit of chaos that felt less like a threat and more like a family joke. The kind of thing that would happen on a Tuesday in the opposites' household and be forgotten by Wednesday. The family was still chaotic, still dysfunctional, still prone to alien tech disasters and casual suburban destruction. But they were together, on Earth, by choice, and the wider universe. The Silvercops exposed, the other Schlorpian teams warned, the Wall's people living under Cherie's complicated rule had finally looped back toward consequence instead of delay. The lights in the suburban house glowed warm against the evening sky. Somewhere in the backyard, tiny people built tiny lives around a lie told with love. Somewhere in space, Dodge Charger carried the truth about the Silvercops toward whoever needed to hear it. And inside the house, 4 aliens and a pupa sat on the couch, watched television, and did not talk about the mission. They did not need to. They had already chosen what mattered more. The screen held on the house for a long, quiet moment. Just a regular-looking home on a regular-looking street, with nothing visible from the outside to suggest that the people inside had come from a destroyed planet, fought corrupt space police, created and abandoned a miniature civilization, and nearly destroyed the world before deciding they would rather just live in it. The porch light clicked on, a cricket sang somewhere near the driveway, and the story, for now, went still.